In a remote village hidden deep within the African savanna, there was a legend passed down from generation to generation. It was said that in the heart of the old, sacred forest, there existed a mystical object known as the Mirror of Souls. This mirror was no ordinary object. It was believed to have been crafted by the ancestors themselves, a portal between the living and the dead. The mirror had the power to show the reflections of those who had passed on, guiding the living toward their true destiny. The villagers spoke of it in reverent tones, and only a few had ever dared to seek it out, for the journey was perilous, and the mirror only revealed itself to those who were worthy. But for one young man named Kato, the legend of the Mirror of Souls was not just a story, it was his last hope. Kato had grown up in the village, surrounded by stories of the great deeds of his ancestors. His father had been a warrior, his grandfather a wise elder, and his great-grandfather a respected healer. But despite his noble lineage, Kato had always felt lost, as though his true purpose was just out of reach. He yearned to understand his place in the world, discover the path that the ancestors had laid out for him. And so, with a heart full of questions and a mind burdened by doubt, Kato decided to embark on the journey to find the Mirror of Souls. The decision was not made lightly. Kato knew that the journey would be fraught with danger. The forest was full of creatures and spirits that could lead him astray, but the pull of the mirror was too strong to resist. He could feel it in his bones, a deep, primal instinct that urged him forward. The night before he set out, Kato stood on the outskirts of the village, looking out at the dark silhouette of the forest against the setting sun. His mother, a kind and gentle woman, came to stand beside him. "Kato," she said softly, her voice tinged with concern, "you do not have to do this. The mirror, it is a legend, a story. What if it is not real?" Kato turned to his mother, his expression resolute. "I must, mother. I have to know who I am, what my purpose is. I cannot continue living in the shadows of our ancestors without understanding my own destiny." His mother sighed, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You are already a good man, Kato. Your father, your grandfather, they would be proud of you. You do not need a mirror to tell you that." Kato smiled gently, taking her hand in his. "I know, mother, but this is something I have to do for myself. I need to know if there is something more out there for me, something that only the mirror can show me." Reluctantly, his mother nodded, understanding the determination in her son's eyes. "Then go, my son. But promise me, you will be careful. The forest is not kind to those who enter unprepared." "I promise, mother," Kato said, embracing her tightly. "I will return, and when I do, I will know my true path." With his mother's blessing, Kato prepared for the journey. He packed provisions, a sturdy walking stick, and a small talisman that had been passed down through his family for generations. A piece of carved wood in the shape of a lion, symbolizing courage and strength. As dawn broke the next day, Kato set out on his journey, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. If you made it up to this point, meaning you enjoy listening to our story, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment. The journey into the sacred forest was unlike anything Kato had ever experienced. The village quickly disappeared from view, swallowed by the dense trees and thick underbrush. The air was cool and damp, filled with the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves. As Kato walked deeper into the forest, the sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves, chirping of insects, and the occasional distant call of an unknown animal. The forest was alive with activity, but it also felt ancient and wise, as though it held secrets that had been kept for centuries. Kato knew that the journey would not be easy, but he was not prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. The first few days were uneventful, filled with nothing more than the monotony of walking and the occasional sighting of a deer or a bird. But as Kato ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to change. The trees grew taller and more imposing, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the sun. The path became less clear, and Kato found himself relying more and more on his instincts to guide him. On the fourth day, as Kato was making his way through a particularly dense thicket, he heard a strange noise, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from all around him. He stopped in his tracks, gripping his walking stick tightly as he scanned the trees for any sign of danger. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and Kato felt his heart begin to race. He had heard stories of the creatures that lived in the forest, lions, leopards, and worse, but he had hoped that he would not encounter any of them. As the growl continued, Kato realized that he was not alone. Slowly, he turned around, and there, standing just a few paces away, was a large, shadowy figure. was a lion, its golden eyes gleaming in the dim light, powerful muscles tensed as it prepared to strike. Kato's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he was paralyzed by fear. The lion was massive, easily twice his size, and it looked hungry. But then something strange happened. As Kato stared into the lion's eyes, he felt a sudden sense of calm wash over him. The fear that had gripped him moments before began to dissipate, replaced by a feeling of connection, understanding. The lion did not move, but its gaze softened, as though it recognized something in Kato. Kato slowly reached for the talisman around his neck, the carved lion that had been passed down through his family. He held it up, allowing the lion to see it. For a long moment, the lion simply stared at the talisman, its eyes flickering with recognition. Then, with a low growl, it turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees as silently as it had appeared. Kato stood there for several minutes, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The lion could have killed him easily, but it had chosen not to. Instead, it had seemed to acknowledge him, as though they shared a bond. Kato knew that the talisman had played a role in the encounter, but he also felt that there was something more at work, something that he could not yet understand. As he continued on his journey, Kato reflected on the encounter with the lion. He realized that the journey was not just about reaching the Mirror of Souls. It was about discovering the truth of his own soul, about facing the fears and doubts that had plagued him for so long. The lion had been a test, challenge from the ancestors, to see if he was worthy of the mirror's guidance. The next few days were difficult. The forest became increasingly treacherous, with steep cliffs, fast-flowing rivers, and dense fog that made it nearly impossible to see the path ahead. But Kato pressed on, driven by a determination that had been strengthened by his encounter with the lion. He knew that the journey was meant to challenge him, push him to his limits, and he was determined not to fail. On the seventh day, Kato reached a clearing in the forest, a place where the trees parted to reveal a small, tranquil lake. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the sky and the surrounding trees like a mirror. In the center of the lake was a small island, and on that island stood the object of Kato's quest, Mirror of Souls. The mirror was tall and slender, its frame made of intricately carved wood that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. The surface of the mirror was smooth and reflective, but it did not show the reflection of the trees or the sky. Instead, it seemed to glow with an inner light that pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow. Kato's breath caught in his throat as he approached the mirror. He had finally found it, the legendary Mirror of Souls. He had heard stories of its power, of how it could show the reflections of those who had passed on. But seeing it in person was a different experience altogether. The mirror was alive, pulsating with energy, as though it was aware of his presence. Carefully, Kato stepped onto the small boat that had been left on the shore of the lake, using the oar to propel himself across the water. The lake was calm and still, and the journey to the island was short. As he reached the shore, Kato stepped out of the boat and approached the mirror, his heart pounding with anticipation. For a long moment, he simply stood there, staring at the mirror's surface. He'd feel the energy radiating from it, a gentle hum that seemed to resonate with his own heartbeat. Slowly, Kato reached out and touched the surface of the mirror, his fingers brushing against the smooth glass. As soon as he made contact, the mirror's surface began to ripple, water disturbed by a pebble. The light within the mirror grew brighter, and Kato felt a strange sensation wash over him. A sensation of being pulled into the mirror, of being drawn into its depths. And then, the reflections began to appear. At first, they were faint, little more than shadows on the surface of the mirror. But as Kato watched, they grew clearer, more distinct. He saw faces, faces of people he had never met, but who felt familiar. The faces of his ancestors. They looked at him with expressions of warmth and pride, their eyes filled with a sense of knowing. Kato's heart swelled as he recognized some of the faces. His father, his grandfather, great-grandfather. They smiled at him, their expressions filled with love and encouragement. Kato felt tears welling up in his eyes as he realized that he was not alone, that his ancestors were with him, guiding him on his journey. But then, the reflections began to change. The faces of his ancestors faded, replaced by images of places and events that Kato had never seen before. He saw a great battle, warriors clashing in a fierce struggle. He saw a village, much like his own, but older, with people dressed in ancient garments. He saw a healer tending to the wounded and a wise elder speaking to a crowd. And then he saw something that made his heart stop. A vision of himself, standing on a cliff overlooking a vast expanse of land. But this was not the Kato he knew. This Kato was older, stronger, filled with a sense of purpose and confidence that he had never felt before. He was dressed in the garments of a leader, with a staff in one hand and a shield in the other. The vision lasted only a moment, but it left Kato shaken. He had seen his destiny, the path that the ancestors had laid out for him. He was meant to be a leader, to guide his people in times of trouble. But the path was not an easy one. It was fraught with challenges and dangers, with battles to be fought and decisions to be made. Kato stepped back from the mirror, his mind reeling from the visions he had seen. He had come to the Mirror of Souls seeking guidance, and he had found it. But with that guidance came a great responsibility, a responsibility that he was not sure he was ready to bear. As Kato sat by the lake, staring out at the water, he felt a sense of doubt creeping in. The visions had shown him a future that he had never imagined for himself, a future that was both inspiring and terrifying. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, that it would require him to be stronger and wiser than he had ever been before. But then he remembered the faces of his ancestors, the love and pride in their eyes. They had faith in him, they believed in him, and if they believed in him, he could believe in himself. Kato took a deep breath and stood up, resolve hardening. He had come to the Mirror of Souls seeking his destiny. He had found it. Now it was up to him to fulfill that destiny, become the leader that his people needed. With a newfound sense of purpose, Kato left the island and began the journey back to his village. Forest, which had once seemed so dark and foreboding, now felt familiar and welcoming. The challenges that had once seemed insurmountable now felt like opportunities for growth. When Kato returned to the village, he was welcomed with open arms. His mother wept with joy at his return, and the villagers gathered around him, eager to hear about his journey. Kato told them of the Mirror of Souls, of the visions he had seen, and of the destiny that awaited him. The villagers listened with rapt attention, their faces filled with awe and admiration. They saw in Kato a new strength, a new confidence that they had never seen before, and they knew without a doubt that he was the leader they had been waiting for. As Kato took on the mantle of leadership, he realized that the journey to the Mirror of Souls had been about more than just discovering his destiny. It had been about discovering himself, about facing his fears, his doubts, and his insecurities, and emerging stronger on the other side. The Mirror of Souls had shown him the reflections of his ancestors, but it had also shown him the reflection of his true self, the man he was meant to become. And as he guided his people through the challenges that lay ahead, Kato knew that he would never be alone. His ancestors would always be with him, guiding him, supporting him, and reminding him of the strength and wisdom that lay within him. The story of Kato and the Mirror of Souls became a legend in the village, a tale passed down through the generation. It was a story of courage, determination, and of the power of the ancestors to guide and protect the living. And for those who were willing to listen, the Mirror of Souls still whispered its secret, revealing the reflections of the past and the promises of the future. As Kato stood on the cliff, overlooking the vast expanse of land, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had found his true path, and he knew that he would walk it with pride and with honor. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. For in the end, Kato had discovered not just his destiny, but the strength and wisdom that had been within him all along. And so the Mirror of Souls continued to reflect the lives and destinies of those who sought its guidance. A silent guardian, past, present, and future. And Kato, the young man who had once been lost, became the leader that his people needed, guided by the reflections of the ancestors and the light of his own soul.